There is an old saying among the tenants of the fen country that a house may be judged not by the master who sits at its head, but by the woman who keeps its still room. For the master orders the world as he wishes it to be, while she keeps it as it is, and only one of them can save a life at 3 in the morning. Marion Ashby had kept the still room at Wexford Hall for 19 years, and in all that time no one above the rank of housekeeper had troubled to learn her name. She was 42 when the story properly begins, though she would not have called it a story, and she would have been faintly embarrassed to hear herself made the subject of one. She was a tall, plain, upright woman, with hands that had been burned and stained and steadied by a lifetime of decoctions, and hair the color of ash going gray at the temples, which she bound back without vanity or apology. She had come to Wexford at 23 as an undercook, and by a quiet, unremarked climb had made herself the keeper of the still room, the small stone chamber off the north passage where the household's remedies were brewed. She was not the housekeeper. She was not the cook. She held no office the family would have recognized as important. She was simply the woman the servants sent for when a scald would not heal, or a fever climbed in the night, or the steward's chest seized so that he could not draw breath. And it was understood in the wordless economy of below stairs that whatever Marion Ashby could not mend was not to be mended by anyone at Wexford short of a surgeon from town, and often not by him. The morning the new Duke came home, she was in the still room grinding valerian, and she did not go out to see him arrive. "You'll not even look?" said Bessie, the youngest of the housemaids, hanging in the doorway with her cap askew and her cheeks red from running. "There's a coach and 4 and outriders, and they say he's black as thunder and hasn't smiled since the old lord died, and Mrs. Pauncefort has us all lined up in the great hall like soldiers. Won't you come, Mrs. Ashby?" "He hasn't come home to see the still room maid," Marion said, without looking up from her mortar. "And I've a poultice that will spoil if I leave it. Go and be looked at, Bessie, since you want it so, and mind you don't gawp." "They say he was a soldier," Bessie went on, undeterred, twisting her apron, "that he killed I don't know how many Frenchmen, and that a fever in Spain very near killed him back, and that's why he looks the way he looks. Cook says a man like that will turn the house upside down. Cook says he'll want French dishes and midnight suppers and heaven knows what." "Cook says a great deal," said Marion, "and grinds none of it fine. A soldier eats what he's given and is grateful, in my experience, or he doesn't and he isn't, and either way it is no affair of ours until he sends down and tells us so. Go on now." Bessie went, disappointed, and Marion ground her valerian and did not think about the new Duke at all, or told herself she did not. She had served 3 masters at Wexford. The first had been a florid, careless man who had died of an apoplexy she had warned his valet was coming. The second his son, a gentle, sickly creature who had lasted 4 years and thanked her, once in the delirium of his last fever, for a kindness he did not remember in the morning. The third was this one, the dead man's cousin, come from his regiment in the north to inherit a house he had not seen since boyhood. And if he was black as thunder, Marion thought, that was the business of his valet and his God, and no concern of a woman who would in all likelihood never exchange a word with him from this day to the day she died. She was wrong about that, as it happened, but not for 11 days. In those 11 days, the house learned its new master the way a household always learns a master, sidelong, in the currency of scraps carried down the back stairs. He did not shout. That was the first thing they said of him, and they said it with a kind of unease, for a shouting master can be managed, but a silent one keeps his own counsel, and you never know where you are. He rose before the servants and walked the frost-hard park alone in the dark of the morning. He ate almost nothing, and sent the dishes back untouched, which wounded cook past speaking. He sat late in the library with a single candle and did not ring, and the footmen took it in turns to sit up in case he did. And he never did. He had brought with him from the regiment exactly one man of his own, a manservant, grave and scarred. And for the rest he took the house as he found it, and looked at the ranked servants in the great hall on the first morning with gray eyes that seemed to Bessie to be looking straight through them all at something behind, something bleak, that had followed him home from wherever he had been. "He's grieving," said Mrs. Pauncefort, the housekeeper, over the servants' supper, with the authority of a woman who had buried a husband. "Grieving hard, and angry with it, and that's the worst kind, for there's no place to set it down." And Marion, at the foot of the table, thought that Mrs. Pauncefort, who was often foolish, had for once said something true, and thought no more about it, and went back down to bank her still-room fire for the night. On the 11th day, the Duke's man came down to the still-room himself, which had never happened in 19 years. His name was Corbin, and he was a lean, grave, soldierly person of perhaps 35, with a scar through one eyebrow and the flat, unhurried voice of a man who had given orders under fire. He stood in the low doorway and had to stoop, and he looked at the ranked bottles and the hanging bunches of dried herb and the great copper still as though he had come into a chapel of a religion he did not follow. "You are the woman they call Ashby," he said, "the one who physics the servants." "I am, sir. His Grace is unwell." He said it stiffly, as though the words cost him. "He has been unwell some days. He will not have the town surgeon, and the surgeon, when he came, did him no good in any case. He hunted for the word, a wasting, a weakness. He does not eat. He sweats at night and cannot sleep, and by day he cannot warm himself. His own physician in London sent powders, and the powders make it worse. Mrs. Pauncefort says you have mended men the surgeon gave up." He stopped, and Marion saw what it had cost this rigid, loyal man to come down 3 flights of stairs to a still room and ask a servant for help. "I am asking you," he said, "to look at him." Marion set down her mortar. "Mr. Corbin," she said carefully, "I mend scalds and eggs and the steward's bad chest. I am not a physician. If his own doctors in London cannot help him, it is not likely a still-room woman will." "His own doctors in London," said Corbin, "have between them the manners of a Turk and the sense of a turnip, and I would not trust one of them to bleed a horse. You I am told to trust. Will you come, or will you not? You are told to trust me by whom? By the steward, whom you kept breathing through a winter 3 doctors had given over. By Mrs. Pauncefort, by the second footman, whose hand you saved when the surgeon wished to take it off at the wrist." Corbin's flat voice did not change, but his eyes did. "I have made it my business these 3 days to ask the house who among them knows anything of healing. Every road ran to this door. I am a soldier, Mrs. Ashby. I go where the ground tells me the strength is. The ground tells me it is here, in this cold little room, and not in any coach from London. Now, will you come?" There was a long moment in the cold little room, the copper still ticking as it cooled, and Marion Ashby made the decision that would remake the rest of her life, though she made it as she made all her decisions, plainly and without drama. "I'll come," she said, "but I'll want to see the powders his London man sent, all of them. And I'll want the truth about what he eats and drinks, and no genteel lying to spare his dignity, for I cannot physic a lie." "You shall have the truth," said Corbin, if I have to hold the household by the throat to get it. That will not be necessary, said Marion, drying her hands on her apron and reaching for her shawl. As a rule, it is only necessary to ask people the truth as though you expect it. They are so surprised they generally give it. Lead on, Misty, Corbin. The Duke's bedchamber was the grandest room Marion had entered in 19 years at Wexford, and she barely saw it. She saw the man in the bed. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 40, though the illness had aged him. A big framed man gone gaunt, with dark hair damp at the brow and a face that must have been hard and handsome and was now merely hard, the skin drawn tight and yellowish over good bones. His eyes, when they opened, were the gray of a winter sea, and they found her in the doorway with an expression she had not braced for, which was not lordly disdain, but a naked, exhausted, furious shame, the shame of a strong man made helpless, who has had strangers standing over him for weeks, and now a servant woman too. So, he said. His voice was a ruin of what it had been. She could hear the ghost of the parade ground in it. Corbin has been to the kitchens for a witch. Come to read my future in the tea, have you? No, Your Grace, Marion said. I've come to smell your medicine. That checked him. He had expected fawning, or fright, or the bright false cheer people bring to sick rooms, and she had given him none of it. Smell it, he repeated. If you'll permit me. She crossed to the table by the bed, where a regiment of little papers and files stood, and she unfolded one paper after another and bent her long nose to each, and her stained, careful fingers moved among them with a sureness the Duke watched despite himself. She touched a fingertip to one gray powder and tasted it, and her face did not change, but something behind it went very still. Well, said Corbin from the foot of the bed. Marion refolded the paper slowly. Who mixed these? My physician, Sir Hugo Fenn, the first man in London for a wasting sickness, or so his bill would suggest. The Duke's mouth twisted. You disapprove of his handwriting? I disapprove, said Marion, of the fact that 3 of these 6 papers are the same drug your steward takes for his heart. In a dose I would not give a plough horse, and that this one, she held it up, is antimony, which will make a well man sick and a sick man dead, and which you have been swallowing, by the look of the paper, twice a day for a fortnight. She looked at him steadily. Your Grace is not wasting. Your Grace is being poisoned by his own doctor, out of fashion and ignorance and too much confidence, and the only wonder is that you have the constitution left to be angry about it. The room was very quiet. Corbin had gone white. The Duke lay back against his pillows and looked at the plain gray woman by his bed as though she had struck him. That, he said at last, softly, is a monstrous thing to say of a knighted physician. It is, Marion agreed, and I'll say it again to his face if he cares to come back for it. I told you I could not physic a lie, Your Grace. I'll not tell one either, to spare a great man's feelings, when his life is the price of the lie. You are very free, said the Duke, and there was danger in it now, the low danger of a man who has been humbled once too often and is looking for something to break. Do you know what I could have done to a servant who spoke so to me in the regiment? Do you know what I may do to you now? I have a fair idea, Your Grace, said Marion. You may have me turned out of the house tonight, without a character, and at my age, and in this country that is very near a sentence of the poorhouse, and I dare say you know it, or you may have me whipped, if the mood is on you, for they'll not stop you. I have thought of both, walking up your stairs, and I find, on the whole, that I would rather be turned out for telling you the truth than kept on for helping your doctor bury you. So there it is. I've said my piece. What you do with it is between you and your conscience, and I'll trouble neither any further than you wish." For a long moment she thought he would have her whipped out of the house. Then something moved in the gray eyes, not warmth, not yet, but the flat, appraising interest of a soldier who has just heard a plan that might, against all sense, actually work. "Stop the powders," he said to Corbin, not taking his eyes from her. "All of them. And you, Ashby," he made her name sound like a challenge. "If you are right, I will owe you my life, and I do not like to owe. And if you are wrong, and I die of stopping Fenn's medicine on the word of a kitchen witch, I will haunt you. Do you understand me?" "Perfectly, Your Grace," said Marion Ashby. "Then we had best make sure I am right." She was right. It is worth saying plainly, because the household did not believe it for a fortnight, and the Duke did not believe it for longer, that she was simply unglamorously right, in the way that competence is right, without any magic in it at all. She threw Sir Hugo Fenn's powders on the midden. She replaced them with nothing but weak broths, and barley water, and a bitter cordial of her own against the sickness in his gut, and she sat with him, or rather she was in and out, for she had a still room to keep and a household to physic besides one lord, and she made Corbin and the Duke's own valet learn to spoon broth into him when she could not. For 3 days he grew no better, and the household whispered that the Ashby woman had killed him. And Mrs. Pauncefort wept in the linen room, and Corbin walked the passages like a ghost. On the 4th day the Duke asked for beef. On the 4th day he asked for beef, and ate a little, and slept the night without the drenching sweats, and the poison began to let go of him, as poison does when you stop administering it, slowly and then all at once. Within a fortnight he could sit up. Within a month he could walk to the window on Corbin's arm and stand looking out at the frost-white park with the winter sun on it, and swear at his own weakness. And in all that month, by degrees so small neither of them marked the moment, Marion Ashby and the Duke of Wexford fell into the strangest intimacy either had ever known, the intimacy of the sick-room, where rank thins to almost nothing. And a man in a nightshirt being fed broth by a woman with stained hands cannot easily pretend she is beneath his notice. His name, she learned, was Julian. Not that she ever called him so, but she learned it, as one learns things at a bedside, along with a great deal else he would never have told a well woman across a drawing-room. "You do not fawn," he said to her one afternoon, watching her measure a tincture against the light. He was propped up and querulous with returning strength, which is the most tiresome stage of any illness. "In a month you have not once told me I look better when I look like a corpse, nor called me poor Your Grace, nor wept at my bravery." "Why is that?" "Because you'd know I was lying," Marion said, "and you've had a bellyful of that already, from men in better coats than mine. And because a sick man doesn't want a mirror held up flattering. He wants to know the truth of himself, so he can set his feet against it. You'll be well by Lady Day, Your Grace, if you stop trying to gallop before you can stand. That's the truth of you. Take it or leave it." "Lady Day," he said, "you are very sure." "I am always sure," said Marion, "when I am sure. It saves everyone a deal of time." He laughed then the first time she had heard him laugh, a rusty, surprised sound, as though the machinery of it had gone stiff from disuse, and Marion Ashby felt something turn over in her chest that she had thought too old and too plain and too sensible to feel. And she put it away at once, firmly, the way she put away a herb out of season, and went on measuring her tincture. She was 42. He was a duke. She had no illusions, and she prided herself on that above all things, A woman who keeps a still room and physics the dying cannot afford illusions. They cost lives. Whatever this was, this ease between them, this dangerous pleasure she took in the exercise of his returning wit, it could be nothing. And she would let it be nothing. And in the spring he would be well, and would marry some pale young heiress with a dowry and a pedigree. And Marion Ashby would go back to her mortar and her scalds and her steward's chest, and count herself lucky to have served. And that would be the end of it. That was her plan. It was a good plan, and a wise one, and it lasted a great while before it broke. But it was breaking. Quietly, all through that long, bright convalescence, in the way such plans break, which is not all at once, but a grain at a time. For the Duke, mending, was a man with nothing to do and a sharp, restless mind. And Marion, coming and going with her tinctures, was the only person in the house who would argue with him. The rest of the household agreed with everything he said out of terror and habit, and it was driving him to distraction. "They are afraid of me," he complained to her one gray afternoon, watching the rain track down the tall windows. "Every soul in this house. I say the sky is green, and Pauncefort curtsies and agrees it is a lovely shade. I have not had an honest quarrel since I left the regiment. A man cannot think, Mrs. Ashby, when everyone about him is nodding." "Then it is fortunate for your thinking," said Marion, straightening his coverlet, "that I have never once agreed with you when you were wrong, and do not mean to start for a wage." "No," he said, and there was something almost wondering in it. "No, you have not. Why is that?" "Corbin fears me, and Corbin has faced cannon." "Corbin," said Marion, "has something to lose by you. His place, his pension, your good opinion. I have nothing to lose that I did not have before you came, which is a mortar and a key and the respect of the poor, and none of those are in your gift. A person who wants nothing from you, your grace, is the only person in the world who can afford to tell you the truth. You would do well to keep one about you always. They are worth more than a physician, and a great deal harder to find." He looked at her for a long moment. "And you want nothing from me, nothing you could give me," Marion said, and believed it, and went to fetch his broth, and did not see the expression on his face as she left, which was the expression of a man revising, in silence, everything he had assumed about his own life. They talked, in those weeks, more than either had talked to another living soul in years. It began with the small commerce of the sick room, this pillow, that draught, whether he might have the window open, and it widened, the way water widens until there was no bank to it. He told her about the North, and the regiment, and the friends he had buried in Spanish ground. He told her about the cousin he had barely known, whose death had made him a duke, and whose comfortable, attended, fundamentally lonely dying he could not stop turning over in the dark. He had 40 servants, the Duke said one evening, apropos of nothing, staring at the fire. 40, and a wife who married his title, and a physician who came in a coach, and when he died I had it from the steward. There was not one soul in the room who knew him. Not one who could have told you what he loved, or feared, or laughed at. He died as rich and as attended and as unknown as a man can be. I have thought about it a great deal, Mrs. Ashby, lying here. I have thought I was very near going the same way, and that no one would have known me either, and that I should have deserved it. For I have taken good care that no one should get close enough to try. And why is that, Your Grace? Marion asked, quietly, not looking up from her work, because she had learned that men say the truest things when they are not being looked at. Because the ones who get close are generally after something, he said. The place, the money, the name. I learned that young. It is easier to be alone and know why people smile at you than to be loved and always wondering. Corbin is the nearest thing I have to a friend, and Corbin is my servant, and I pay him. And so even that is spoiled a little, do you see? Even that I cannot quite trust, though God knows he has earned it. He turned his head on the pillow and looked at her. But you will not take my money. I have offered you extra for the nursing, and you have refused it twice. You argue with me. You tell me I look like a corpse. You are the first person in 20 years who has cost me nothing to be near, and I find I do not know what to make of you at all. Marion set down her measuring glass, and for once did not have a quick, plain answer ready. I'll tell you what to make of me, she said at last. I'm a woman who found out young that she had one thing worth having, which was that she could learn. Not beauty, you can see I've none. Not a fortune, nor a family to speak of. Only that I could take a difficult thing and worry at it till I understood it, when the cleverer, prettier girls had gone off to be married. So that's what I did with my life, Your Grace. I learned the one trade that would have me, that a woman could learn without a college or a fee, and I learned it as well as it can be learned, better than the men who do it for money, because it was all I had and I could not afford to do it by halves. And a person who has built her whole self out of the truth of a thing, out of what a plant will do, and what a dose will do, which do not change to flatter you, such a person cannot lie to please a great man, not because she is brave, but because lying is the one thing she never learned how to do. That is all I am. There's no mystery in it. I'm only a woman who tells the truth because it's the single accomplishment I ever had, and I've grown too proud of it to give it up. The Duke was silent for a long time. That, he said finally, is the most honest account of a life I have ever heard a person give. Do you know I could not give you its equal? I have had every advantage you have lacked, and I could not tell you in one breath what I am for, as you have just told me what you are for. I begin to think, Mrs. Ashby, that you are the richer of the two of us, and always have been, and that this is the joke the world has been keeping from me my whole life. The world keeps that joke from most great men, said Marion, taking up her glass again. It is not kind to spoil it for them, as a rule. They do not thank you. Now drink this, and stop philosophizing, for it does nothing for the digestion. He drank it, and he did not stop philosophizing, and neither, if she was honest with herself in the dark of her own cold room, did she want him to. That was the trouble. She found she looked forward, all through her long day of poultices and scalded scullery maids and the steward's wheezing chest, to the hour of the evening when she would carry up his draught, and he would say something dry and impossible, and she would say something dry and impossible back, and for a little while 2 people who had spent their whole lives being either feared or overlooked would be simply in the same room, equals, arguing, at ease. She knew it was a danger. She knew exactly what it was, for she was not a girl, and had watched other women make fools of themselves and had sworn she never would. She told herself it was the natural closeness of nurse and patient and would pass when he was well. She was, for once in her rigorously honest life, lying to herself, and some cool, clear part of her knew it and said nothing, and let her, because it was not only she who had changed. The Duke, mending, had begun to watch for her. Corbin saw at first, as Corbin saw most things, saw that his Grace, who had sent every other visitor away, kept the still-room woman by him on the thinnest excuses, saw that he saved up the day's few small events to tell her, saw that on the afternoons she was long in coming. Kept below by some crisis of the household, his master grew short and restless and watched the door. Corbin, who was the most discreet man in England, said nothing to anyone, and thought a great deal, and reserved his judgment, and quietly began to treat Mrs. Ashby in the small, unmistakable ways a good servant has, as a person of consequence in that house, which the rest of the servants noticed and wondered at and could not account for. The strangeness of it was not lost on the household, and by degrees a kind of watchfulness settled over Wexford. It was noticed that his grace was mending, which pleased everyone, and it was noticed how, which pleased them less, for it upset the order of things, and servants above all people depend upon the order of things. Mrs. Pauncefort took to sighing. Cook made remarks. The upper servants, who had a nice sense of degree, did not know how to place a still-room woman who was received by the Duke as though her opinion signified, and the not knowing made them uneasy and a little unkind, in the way people are unkind about what they cannot fit into its proper box. Marion felt the change in the servants' hall, the small silences, the sidelong looks, and understood them perfectly, and grieved a little, for the servants' hall had been her whole society for 19 years, and she saw that she was being quietly moved outside it, and had done nothing to deserve it but be listened to by a lord. "They think I'm reaching above myself," she said to Corbin one morning on the stairs plainly, because plainness was her habit. Below stairs. "They think I've got ideas." "They think," said Corbin, "what small people always think when they see one of their own singled out. That it must be by some trick, since it cannot be by desert. For if it were by desert, then any of them might have earned it and did not, and that is not a comfortable thought." He looked at her with his flat grave eyes. "Pay it no mind, Mrs. Ashby. You have done nothing wrong. You have told a dying man the truth, and he has had the wit to be grateful. If the house cannot bear the sight of that, the fault is in the house. That is a very handsome thing to say, Mr. Corbin, and I thank you for it. But it is easy for you. You are the Duke's own man. Your place is not in the servants' hall, so you do not mind losing it." "No more, I think," said Corbin quietly, "is yours any longer, though it is not my place to say so, and I will not say it again." And he touched his brow and went on up the stairs, and left Marion standing on the landing with a cold feeling that was not quite fear and not quite hope, understanding for the first time that whatever was happening to her had already gone too far to be undone, and that she stood now between two worlds and belonged wholly to neither, and that this was a lonely place to stand, and would grow lonelier before it grew otherwise, if it ever did. The break, when it came in the servants' hall, over the cold mutton of a Thursday supper, and it came from Mrs. Pauncefort, who had been swelling toward it for a week. "I'm sure," said the housekeeper, to the table at large, but at Marion in particular, in the voice of a woman who is not sure at all and means everyone to know it, "I'm sure it's a great thing to be so very thick with his grace. A still-room woman, that was under Cook in my own memory. A great thing. I only wonder that some people find the time for their proper work, with all this running up and down to the great chamber. There's the linen maid's leg gone bad again, that I hear no one has looked at. But there. Some of us have grander patience now." The table went still. The footmen studied their plates. Marion set down her knife. "The linen maid's leg," she said quietly, "I dressed this morning, before 6, Mrs. Pauncefort, as I dress it every morning, and it is mending, which you would know if you had asked her instead of me. I have not missed a scald, nor an agag, nor a bad chest in this house since his grace fell ill. If I had, you would have had it out before the soup. So let us have the true grievance, and not the leg, for the leg is well, and we are neither of us fools." "The true grievance," said Mrs. Pauncefort, coloring, "is that you've got above yourself, Marion Ashby, and the whole hall sees it but you. sitting with him by the hour, being asked your opinion, as if you were quality. It isn't seemly. It isn't your place. And when it ends, as end it must, for such things always end, it's this hall you'll be coming back to. And I only hope you'll not have made yourself too fine for the company you'll be glad enough of again. It was said in spite, but there was fear under the spite. The old, deep fear of the below-stairs world, which is that one of its own, singled out, will forget the rest, and that the order that shelters them all will crack. Marion heard the fear, and it took the anger out of her, and she answered the fear and not the spite. I have not forgotten one soul at this table, she said, and I will not, whatever comes. I have poulticed near every hand in this hall and sat up with half of you through one fever or another, and that is not a thing a body forgets, nor wants to. If his grace asks my opinion, I give it, because he is my master, and it would be insolence to withhold it, and if that makes trouble for me, the trouble is mine, and I'll carry it, and I'll not bring it down to this table. But I'll tell you this, Mrs. Pauncefort, plainly, as I tell everything. I did not seek it. I went up those stairs to save a dying man, because his own man begged me, and no one else would, and I would do it again tomorrow if it were the scullery boy dying and not a duke. For a life is a life, and I do not weigh them by the coat. You may call that above myself, if you like. I call it my trade, and I'll thank you to leave the linen maid's leg out of it, for she is frightened enough of losing it without being made a stick to beat me with. There was a silence. Then old Thomas the undergroom, who had not spoken a word in the hall in a 12-month, said gruffly into his cup, "She sat up 3 nights with my chest, winter afore last. 3 nights. Never asked a farthing." And another voice, further down, said, "A.A. and mine." And Mrs. Pauncefort, outnumbered by the plain memory of the room, went red and then white and pushed back her chair and left the hall, and did not speak to Marion for a fortnight, and then, being not truly a bad woman, but only a frightened and a foolish one, made it up over a shared task in the linen room with no word said on either side, which is how such things are mended below stairs. But the exchange had cost Marion something, and she carried it up to the great chamber that evening in her face, and the Duke, who by now read her as closely as she had once read his medicine, saw it at once. "Something has happened," he said, setting aside the book he had not been reading. "Below? Tell me." "It is nothing, your grace. A supper-table squall. It is mended, or mending. It is not nothing. You have the look you had the day you told me about the antimony, the look of someone who has held her ground and been bruised for it. Sit down, Marion. Tell me who has been unkind to you in my house, and I will." "You will do nothing," she said, sharply. And then, gentler, "You will do nothing, your grace, if you have any care for me at all. Do you not see it? That is the whole of the trouble. If you take my part below stairs, you make it true. You make me the woman who has the Duke's ear, who need only whisper, and a housekeeper is dismissed. You would ruin me with the kindness. The only way I keep my place among them is to fight my own battles at my own table with my own weight, and win them or lose them on my own account, as one of them, and not as your favorite." She said the word as though it tasted of the antimony. "Let me be, your grace. I have fought harder rooms than a servant's hall, and come off. This one I can manage, if you will only keep your hands off it." He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his hard face was working. "You will not let me give you money," he said slowly. "You will not let me raise you, nor name you, nor defend you. You guard your independence of me the way a soldier guards a river crossing, as though your life depended on my never being allowed to do you a single good turn you have not earned twice over. Why, Marion? Other servants scheme for a lord's favor their whole lives. You run from mine as though it were the plague. Because a lord's favor is the plague. To a woman like me, she said. Have you never watched it? A great man takes a fancy to physic a servant, raises her, sets her above the others, and the day the fancy passes, and it always passes, she is left with nothing but the hatred of everyone she was raised above, and no place in any world, high or low. I have seen it done. I have seen the woman after. I swore, a long time ago, that whatever I got in this life I would get by my own hand and hold by my own right, so that no man's changing mind could take it from me. My mortar is mine. My key is mine. My knowledge is mine, and no one can ungive it. Those are the only things in this world that are truly safe, Your Grace, and I have built my whole life on them. And I will not trade them for your favor, which is here today, and married to an heiress by Michaelmas. She stopped, having said more than she meant, and looked away. Forgive me, I speak too plain. No, said the Duke, very quietly. No, you speak exactly plain enough. You always have. And he said nothing more that evening about defending her, and let her go down when her work was done, but he sat long after by the dying fire, turning over the words married to an heiress by Michaelmas, and finding, somewhat to his own alarm, that the picture they made of himself at a fine table, across from a pale, well-bred girl who would agree that the sky was green, filled him with a flat gray dread he could not at first account for, and then could account for all too well. Still, she would not name the thing. Not even to herself. It was one matter to know, in the cool back of the mind, that a lord had come to depend on her company. It was another entirely to imagine that anything could come of it but grief, and Marion had a horror of the particular folly of an aging woman, who lets herself hope and is laughed at for it, and deserves to be. So she held her tongue, and held her heart, and did her work. And when the Duke, growing stronger, began to keep her by him longer, and to ask her opinion on matters that had nothing to do with medicine, the management of a tenant's debt, the character of a man who had applied to be his agent, whether a certain letter struck the right note, she gave him her plain sense and pretended not to notice how far outside her station the asking took her. "Why do you ask me these things?" she said to him once, exasperated, when he had laid before her a dispute between two of his tenants, and asked her, in all seriousness, how she would judge it. "I'm a still-room maid, Your Grace. What do I know of leases and boundaries, and which man has the right of the ditch?" "You know people," he said simply. "You have spent your life at the bedsides of the poor, watching them at the one time no one can pretend to be other than they are, which is when they are frightened and in pain. You know a liar. You know a proud man who would rather starve than ask. You know which of two quarreling fools is quarreling out of grievance and which out of greed. I have spent my life among people who are always performing, and I cannot tell any longer what is under the performance. You can. It is the rarest skill I have ever encountered, and you carry it about as though it were nothing, along with your poultices. So yes, Mrs. Ashby, I ask you which tenant has the right of the ditch, and I will tell you that since I began to ask you, I have judged these matters better than I ever did alone, and my tenants are the better for it, and so, I find, am I. To this Marion had no answer at all, and so she gave him her judgment of the ditch, which was sound, and he took it. And the tenants were the better for it, exactly as he had said. And so it went on, week by bright week, the two of them building without a word for it a partnership that had no name and no permission and no place in the ordered world of Wexford Hall, a thing grown quietly in the shelter of a sick room that would have to face the daylight eventually and be seen and be judged. Marion knew the daylight was coming. She did not know it would come in a grand coach, wearing silk, carrying a gold-headed cane. Sir Hugo Fenn came in April, when the Duke was near mended, in a coach as grand as the Duke's own. A plump, silken, self-satisfied man with a gold-headed cane and a way of not quite looking at the people he spoke to. He had heard, in London, that his most illustrious patient had dismissed his treatment on the word of a servant, and it had brought him north in a fury dressed as concern. For a knighted physician who can be overruled by a kitchen witch is a physician whose fashionable practice is bleeding to death. Marion was in the great hall when he arrived, as it happened, carrying fresh linen for the Duke's room, and she stood back against the wall as a servant should while Sir Hugo swept in and was bowed toward the library where the Duke waited to receive him. She would have gone on up the stairs and thought no more of it. But at the library door Sir Hugo turned, and his eye fell on her, on the linen, the stained hands, the ash-gray hair, and some instinct told him what she was, and he chose, being the kind of man he was, to fight his battle in front of an audience. "You," he said. "Girl, you are the creature who has been dosing his grace." Marion was not a girl and had not been for a quarter century, but she inclined her head. "I have been physicking him, sir, yes? On what authority? What training? What university gave you your physic, eh?" He advanced on her, playing to the footman, to Mrs. Pauncefort frozen on the stair, to the Duke now standing in the library doorway drawn by the noise. "Speak up, woman. Where did you study medicine?" "I did not study it anywhere, sir," said Marion. "I learned it. She learned it." Sir Hugo turned to the Duke, spreading his plump hands in delighted appeal. "Your Grace, you see the depth of the imposture. An unlettered still-room drab, who learned her trade off gypsies and old wives, has been permitted to overturn the considered treatment of a fellow of the College of Physicians. It would be a comedy, Your Grace, were your own precious life not the stage. I must insist, I must beg, that this dangerous woman be dismissed the house this very hour, and that you place yourself again under proper, learned, gentleman's care, before her ignorance completes what it has begun." It was very well done. It was the sort of speech that wins its case in 9 great houses out of 10, for it enlisted rank and learning and the deep, comfortable prejudice that a lord's life must be worth more than a servant's word. Marion felt the household believe it. She felt the footman's eyes slide from her, embarrassed for her. She was, after all, only what he said, an unlettered woman with stained hands. And he was a knight, and this was his world and not hers. She might have borne it in silence. She had borne a great deal in silence over 19 years. But the Duke had opened his mouth to speak, and she saw in his face that he meant to defend her, to spend his own new-won authority in front of his whole household on a still-room maid, and she could not let him do it, for it would ruin him more than it saved her. A great man may keep an eccentric servant. He may not be seen to prize one above a knight, not without a whisper following him for the rest of his days. The whisper she had heard already below stairs, grown loud, and given a lord's name. If he defended her now, they would say she had bewitched him, and the saying would stick, and it would cost him more than she was worth. She saw all this in the half-second before he spoke, the way she saw a fever's turn before the patient felt it, and she made her second life remaking decision as plainly as the first. So Marion Ashby set down her linen on the hall table, folded her stained hands in front of her apron, and defended herself. "Sir Hugo," she said, and her voice was not loud, but it carried, because it did not shake. "You ask where I studied. I'll tell you, and I'll tell His Grace, and then he may do as he thinks right. I did not study at any college, that's true, for they'd not have a woman, and I'd not have had the fees if they would. I learned my physic at the bedsides of the poor for 19 years, where a mistake is buried the next morning and no fine bill sent after. I learned it out of 3 books I bought with 3 years' wages and read until the covers came off. I learned it from an apothecary in Norwich who took a servant girl seriously when no one else in England would, and taught her the making and the dose and the poison of every simple that grows in this country, until she knew them better than the men who prescribed them from a coach and never touched the plant." She took a step toward him, and Sir Hugo, to his surprise, took one back. "You gave His Grace antimony," she said, "twice a day, for a wasting you called a wasting because you did not trouble to look closer. And antimony is a poison, sir, as you would know if you had ever ground it yourself instead of ordering it ground. You gave him foxglove in a dose fit to stop a bull's heart, mixed with the same drug his own steward takes, so that between the two you had his pulse going like a broken clock. I have the papers still, Sir Hugo. I kept every one, every twist and every paper your man made up, dated in your own hand, for I keep everything, being a careful woman, which is a habit you might study. I can lay them on this table and name each drug and each grain to His Grace and to any magistrate in the county, and you may explain to them, with all your learning, why the treatment of the first physician in London reads like a receipt for murder." She paused. "I am an unlettered woman, sir, but I can read a physician's own hand well enough to hang him with it." The silence in the great hall was total. Sir Hugo Fenn had gone the color of tallow. He opened his mouth and shut it, and looked, for the first time, directly at her, and what he saw in the plain gray face was not ignorance and not insolence, but certainty. The terrible flat certainty of someone who is holding the truth and knows exactly how heavy it is. He was a clever man in his way, and he understood in that instant that this woman was not bluffing, that the papers existed, that she had kept them the way a careful person keeps everything, and that if he pressed his cause one word further she would produce them, and his ruin would begin here in this cold northern hall and follow him back to every fashionable drawing-room in London. "This is absurd," he said, but the silk had gone thin. A servant's spite, dressed up in cant she has picked up parroting her betters. No magistrate would hear it. No court would. "Then you have nothing to fear from the papers, sir," said Marion, "and no reason to want me dismissed before they can be looked at. A man who is easy in his physic does not tremble when a still-room maid offers to show his own hand to a magistrate. He says, 'By all means, show them. They will clear me.' I notice you have not said it." She let that sit a moment in the ringing quiet. "You came here today to have me put out of the house before anyone thought to read what you had written. You are too late, Sir Hugo. It has been read." "I see," he said, and his voice had gone to a thread, "that His Grace's household has been poisoned against me by more than one means. I will not stay to be insulted by a servant." He turned to the Duke and mustered a last brittle dignity. "Your Grace, I wish you joy of your physician. When she has killed you, my bill will still be owing. Good day." He left. The great door boomed shut behind him, and the sound of it went up into the roof of the hall and came back down, and no one moved. and Marion Ashby stood in the enormous quiet with her stained hands folded and her heart going hard, and thought with a strange calm, "Well, that is done. Now I shall be dismissed too, for a great house cannot keep a servant who humiliates a knight in its own hall. Whatever the truth of it." She turned to the Duke to say something of the kind, to make it easy for him, to resign before she could be sent away. He was looking at her as though he had never seen her before. "Mrs. Ashby," said the Duke of Wexford, and it was the first time in 19 years anyone in that house had put the Mrs. in front of her name. "Will you come into the library? There is a great deal I find I wish to say to you, and I had rather not shout it across my own hall in front of the silver." She went into the library. Mrs. Pauncefort, on the stair, sat down abruptly on a step. Corbin, by the door, allowed himself, for the first time in the whole affair, the ghost of a smile, and then, being Corbin, took it off his face and cleared the hall of gaping footmen with 3 flat words and a look, so that whatever passed in the library should at least pass unheard. What passed in the library that April afternoon Marion never repeated to a living soul, and neither did he, and so it must be given here as the two of them alone knew it, which is to say plainly, and with the understanding that plain words were the only kind either of them trusted. He shut the door. The room was full of the flat gold light of a northern spring, falling across the ranked books and the great globe and the long table, and Marion stood in the middle of it, with her hands folded, and waited to be thanked and pensioned and sent away, and had her whole speech ready, how she had served the house gladly, how she would go without fuss, how she asked only a character, so that she might find another place. He offered her, first, money, a sum that made her sit down. She refused it. He offered next to make her physician to the household in name as well as fact, with a wage and a title and a room of her own above the still room, and this she did not refuse, but she did not answer either, because she could see in his face that it was not what he had brought her into the library to offer, and that he was working his way toward the true thing by the road of easier things, the way a man wades out from the shallows, feeling for the drop. "Your Grace," she said, when he had run out of easy things and stood at the window with his back to her. "Silent. You are a plain-dealing man when you let yourself be, and I have never known you a coward. Whatever it is you brought me in here to say, say it, for I have a poultice on and it will spoil, and I would rather lose the poultice to the truth than keep it for a speech that goes round and round." "Julian," she said then, more quietly. She had never used his name and did not know she was going to, and the sound of it stopped him as though she had laid a hand on his chest, and he turned. "There, I've said it once, and the roof has not fallen. Now you say your piece, and I'll say mine, and we'll neither of us be cowards about it, for I am too old to be courted round the houses, and you are too honest to enjoy it." So he said it. He said that in 20 years of soldiering and 40 of living, he had never in his life met a person, man or woman, gentle or common, whom he trusted as completely as he had learned to trust the plain, blunt, fearless woman who had refused to flatter him when he was dying and refused to be flattered now that he was well. He said that a duke might marry a fortune or a bloodline or a pretty face, and be attended all his days by people paid to lie to him, and die at last as his cousin had died, surrounded by comfort and truly known by no one. Or a duke might, if he had the courage and did not give a damn for the drawing-rooms of London, marry the one soul in England who had proved past doubting that she would tell him the truth though the heavens fell and a night roared and her own place was forfeit for it. "You stood in my hall an hour ago," he said, and you would not let me defend you. Do you know why that undid me, Marion, when nothing else in 20 years has? Because I saw what you were doing. You saw, quicker than I did, that if I spent my name on you, the world would say you had witched me, and it would cost me, and you would sooner take the whole weight of that man's spite on your own back and be turned out into the road than let it cost me a farthing. You protected me, a servant with nothing, protected a duke with everything, and asked nothing for it, and meant to walk out of my house and my life without so much as letting me thank her. And I stood there and I understood, all at once, that in my whole guarded, wary, well-defended life, I have never once been loved by a person who wanted nothing from me, and that I was about to let her leave. Marion said nothing. She could not. I am not offering you rank, he went on, and now the ruined parade ground voice went for a moment unsteady, and he did not trouble to steady it. Rank is nothing. I was born to it, and it brought me a cold bed and a coach full of poison and a cousin's lonely death for a warning. I am offering you the only thing I have found in this life worth the giving, which is a partnership of equals in the plain sight of God, my name to yours, my table to yours, my judgment laid open to your plain sense every day that we both live. I would be obliged to you, he said, more obliged than for my life, which after all you have already given me once, if you would consent to spend what remains of both our days keeping me honest, for it appears no one else alive is willing to try, and I find, Marion, that I cannot go back to being lied to. You have spoiled me for it. You have shown me the difference between being served and being loved, and a man cannot unsee that. And I will not have any woman in England but the one who taught it to me. Marion Ashby was 42 years old, and she had prided herself her whole life on having no illusions, and she discovered in that library that she had been nursing the largest illusion of all, the one that told her that a woman like her was not permitted, by God or the world, to be simply and fully loved for exactly what she was. There will be a great scandal, she said, when she could speak. There will, he agreed. A magnificent one. The dowagers of 3 counties will take to their beds. I find I am looking forward to it. They will say you married your kitchen witch. They will say I trapped you, or drugged you, or worse. They will say it of me until I die, and some of them will say it after. You know they will. You have lived among them. You know exactly what they are. I do, he said. I know them to the bone, and I have decided that I do not care for the opinion of people I do not respect, on a matter they cannot understand, concerning the only happiness I have ever been offered. Let them talk. Talk is the currency of the idle, and I have grown too poor in years to spend mine on it. He crossed the room to her. They will say, said the Duke, that the Duke of Wexford married the woman who saved his life, having first tried the fashionable alternative and very nearly died of it. Let them say it. It is even true. And he held out his hand to her, not a lord's hand offered to be kissed, but a plain hand offered to be taken, palm up, level, between equals. Marion, I have asked you a question. You have never in your life left an honest question unanswered to spare someone's feelings. Do not start now. And Marion Ashby, still room maid of Wexford Hall, looked at the offered hand, and at the gray eyes that had learned, at 40, not to lie to her, and she gave him the truth, as she had given him nothing but the truth from the first day, because the truth was the only dowry she had ever owned, and it turned out to be the only one he had ever wanted. Yes, she said. God help us both. Yes, they were married in the small parish church at the edge of the park, quietly, in the last week of April, with the white horn coming into flower along the lanes, and the whole scandalized county watching from behind its curtains, and not one of them invited. Corbin gave the bride away, gravely, and thought his hard heart would crack with the strangeness and the rightness of it. Mrs. Pauncefort wept through the whole service into a handkerchief the size of a tablecloth. Bessie, the housemaid, promoted for the day, held the flowers and told everyone below stairs for the rest of her life that she had known, she had always known, there was more to Mrs. Ashby than the mortar and the poultices. And when the plain vows were said in the plain words Marion had insisted on, without one embellishment, the little church was so silent that the birds could be heard in the Whitehorn outside, and more than one hard old tenant, come to Gop and stayed to be moved, said afterward that the silence in that church when the still-room maid became the Duchess of Wexford was a thing they would remember to the end of their lives, for it was the silence of a whole small world quietly rearranging itself around a truth it had not seen coming. And the dowagers did take to their beds, exactly as promised, and the drawing-rooms of London hummed for a season with the delicious horror of it. The Duke and his witch, the Duke and his herb woman, the Duke who might have had any heiress in the 3 kingdoms, and chose instead a 42-year-old servant with stained hands and no more pedigree than a hedge. They waited, all of them, for the marriage to sour, for the Duke to tire of his eccentricity, for the still-room maid to be quietly pensioned off to a cottage when the novelty wore thin. They waited a long time, and they waited in vain. For here is the thing the drawing-rooms could not understand, having never in their scented, idle lives possessed it. The Duke of Wexford had not married beneath him. He had married the one person he had ever met who was, in the way that finally mattered, entirely his equal, who owed him nothing, feared him not at all, and had proved with a fistful of poisoned papers that she would face down a knight and forfeit her own bread rather than let a lie stand where his life was concerned. A man may buy flattery by the yard. He cannot buy that. And Julian, Duke of Wexford, who had been dying by inches in a cold bed surrounded by people paid to attend him, had grown wise enough, at the very edge of his own grave, to know the difference between being served and being loved, and to reach, when the choice was at last before him, for the harder and the truer thing. She never played the great lady, and never tried to. She wore good plain gowns and no jewels to speak of, and she kept, to the initial outrage of Mrs. Pauncefort and the eventual fierce pride of the whole household, her own key to the still room, and went down to it most mornings as she always had, to grind her valerian and brew her cordials and physic the tenants who came to the kitchen door with their scalds and their eggs and their bad chests, only now they came in far greater numbers, and from far further off. For word had gone round the fen country that the Duchess of Wexford was a healer of the poor, who would turn no one away and take no fee she was not freely offered. She trained 2 clever girls under her, and then 4, servants' daughters with quick hands and no prospects, and taught them the making and the dose and the poison of every simple that grew in that country, so that her knowledge should not die when she did, but pass on into hands that would use it. She and the Duke were seen, by such of the county as would still receive them, to be the plainest spoken and least fashionable and most quietly contented couple in the north of England, and it was observed by the sharper sort that his Grace, who had come home black as thunder and half in his grave, had become in his middle years a man at ease in his own skin, who laughed easily and lied never, and looked at his unlikely Duchess across their supper table as though he could not, even now, quite believe his own good sense. And the county, which had come to sneer, came slowly and grudgingly to something else. For it is one thing to keep up a scandal about people you never see, and another to keep it up about neighbors who nurse your children through the scarlet fever and ask no fee, who send broth to your gatekeeper's widow and a poultice to your groom's crushed hand, who are, in 100 small, unarguable ways across the turning of the years, plainly and inconveniently good. The dowagers who had taken to their beds got up again, in time having beds to keep and dinners to give, and found that the Duke and Duchess of Wexford could not be cut without cutting off the best run and most open-handed estate in the county, and one by one, with the poor grace of proud people admitting a mistake, they came round. Some came for the connection and stayed for the woman. A few, the honest ones, came in the end simply to say that they had been wrong, and were received by the Duchess without a flicker of triumph, and given tea, and never once reminded of it, which shamed them more than any reproach could have done. He lived another 19 years, the same span. She once remarked to him that she had kept his still room unregarded, so that he had now been her business exactly as long as she had been nobody's, and he died at last in his own bed, unpoisoned, at a great age for that hard century, with his hand in her stained and steady one, and no stranger in the room. She sat with him at the end as she had sat with him at the beginning, and told him the truth to the last, which was that he had been a great deal of trouble and worth every hour of it, and he laughed his rusty laugh one final time, and told her she was the only fortune he had ever made, and slept, and did not wake, and she closed his gray eyes herself, and did not weep until the door was shut, because she had always believed that a person's grief, like a person's dignity, is their own and not a thing to be performed for onlookers. She outlived him by 6 years, and kept the still room to the end, and trained her girls, and physicked the poor, and was, by the time she followed him, so beloved across that whole broad reach of fen and field that they lined the lanes for her funeral 3 deep, tenants and servants and the grown sons and daughters of the servants she had taught, far more than had ever lined them for any duke, and among them not a few of the fine folk who had once taken to their beds at the scandal of her, and had lived long enough to be ashamed of it, and to be glad now that they had come round in time to know her. There is an old saying among the tenants of the fen country that a house may be judged not by the master who sits at its head, but by the woman who keeps its still room. Marion Ashby kept the still room at Wexford Hall for 19 years before anyone above the rank of housekeeper troubled to learn her name, and for 25 years after, as its mistress. And in all that time she never once told a comfortable lie to spare a great person's feelings, nor turned a poor one from her door, nor ground a remedy with a careless hand. She was not saved by her patience, though she had a great deal of it. She was not saved by her beauty, for she had none to speak of, and would have laughed at you for suggesting it. She was saved, if saved is the word for a woman who was in plain truth the one doing the saving, by the plain, unglamorous, unfakeable fact of what she knew, and by the rarer courage to stake everything on it in a hall full of people who would rather she had kept quiet. And that, in the end, in a world forever dazzled by the coat and the coach and the fine physician's bill, was the whole of her, and the heart of her, and it made her the truest lady in England. The poor she healed said it first, and the tenants said it after, and in the fullness of years even the great folk who had scorned her came to say it too, until it was less an opinion than a fact of the country, worn smooth with saying, that in a world forever dazzled by the coat and the coach, a plain grey woman with stained hands had told nothing but the truth to a dying duke, and it made her the truest lady in England. And it was said of her, long after, whenever a proud man was flattered to his ruin or a wise woman overlooked for her plainness, said quietly, the way the truest things are said, that she had healed him with a remedy any of them might have had for the asking, and none of them had the courage to give, which was the truth, and it made her the truest lady in England. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from and what this story made you feel. And if it moved you, consider subscribing softly so you won't miss the next one.